Welcome back. As listeners, you probably know I've gone through two major career changes, and it's definitely not for everyone. And one is considering it, the change can be very scary since there is no blueprint to making that career transition. And today I've got a very special guest, Amaris White, who has made such a change. And we're going to hear her story about how she did it and what inspired her change. In case you're wondering who she is, Amaris is a compulsive globetrotter and impact leader with experience in nonprofit management, corporate law, and academia. She's a California transplant and moved to New York City 15 years ago, and now a proud Jersey City resident for the last 2.5 years. That's how we know each other. Amaris, let's go straight into it. What do you do now, and what did you do before?
Great question. So I currently work in the impact space as something that's called an impact investing principle. Most people have no idea what it is because it's a
I
role
don't.
that we made up at a law. I work at a law firm, but we made up this role about a year ago. So essentially, I work in the impact investing space. Impact investing is a way to invest while also doing good. So a lot of times you have on one end of the spectrum philanthropy, nonprofits, foundations, where you're using money and don't expect any sort of return. And then on the other side, you have traditional investments where your primary goal is to make money. Impact investing is a way in which you can do both at the same time. You can use your money to have a positive impact on the world and still do well yourself financially. And the space is sort of showing that you don't have to pick one. You can do business and do good at the same time. So that's the space I work in now. I
Mhm.
started out as a corporate lawyer, which telling you that I started and am now at a law firm doesn't quite seem like a career jump. But between the two, there was 7 years of journey, and I never thought I'd be back at a law firm when I first left. I started out as a corporate attorney doing corporate finance, M&A, very just business focused, working with like multi-million, billion-dollar companies. And it was not where I found a great source of joy, and I wasn't feeling really happy and satisfied with the work. I spent some time working at a bank after that, and then I quit my job and then spent some time working in the nonprofit world, academia, and now I'm back at a firm, but as a non-lawyer and working with just our impact clients.
That's so interesting. From the moment that you left being a corporate lawyer to where you are now, you said it was about 7 years. So your
Um,
transition in some ways.
yeah, I guess about 7 years. Yeah, I left my job at a bank at the end of 2016. So December
Okay.
31st, the last day of the year, I left. And then I flew to South America that day.
So this is the beginning when you quit your corporate job.
Yeah, quit my job, corporate job
Mhm.
7 years ago at this point.
Can you talk about, and I think this is like what's crucial for people when they're thinking about career change. Um, what were the things that led up to that decision? Because it sounds like all easy, like, oh, people just quit, but there's a lot of emotional turmoil that comes up to there. And then there's some point where you're just like, I just can't. So
Yeah.
can you describe that?
No, totally. So I had first spent 3 years working at a large law firm in New York City. The whole reason I went to law school was to work in government. I thought that one day I'd be able to work in like a government or nonprofit or impact space of some sort. I didn't exactly know what that looked like. I think a lot of times when you go to law school or you join a large firm, they say that you can do anything and all of the doors will open. Um, but unfortunately, the specific doors I was looking for were not opening. And so I spent quite a bit of time while I was at the law firm trying to figure out how to move into the impact space. And I
Hmm.
didn't even know what impact meant. And the definition of impact 10 years ago and the definition of impact today is different, and it'll be different again in 10 years. So it's such a constantly evolving space. But I was looking for a way to pivot and I didn't know how. So I ended up switching to going in-house for a little bit. I was at a bank. I thought maybe if I was in-house, I'd be happier. But again, similarly, sort of found myself thinking this is not how I can picture spending the next 3 decades of my life. I just can't do
Hmm.
this. And a
Can you
number
talk a
of,
little bit about like what made you feel that way? Was it Sunday scaries? Like what was, did it have any physical manifestation or, emotional?
Yeah, I mean, I was under a lot of stress, I think, just thinking about, how I wanted to live my life. And your job is a really, really big part of your life. I mean, obviously, it's not everything. And a lot of people work to live, and that's okay too. But for me, it was really important that I gain that personal satisfaction from my
Hmm.
job and what I was doing for many, many hours a day. In huge part because I had a near death experience back in 2012. So I guess it was 4 or 5 years before I ended up making the switch to move. I had a near death experience. I was traveling. I was in Southeast Asia. I had a really severe blood clot, 4 foot long blood clot in my leg and blood clots in both lungs, and was really unsure if I'd even make it to my birthday the next week. So it was pretty severe. And I was in and out of surgery for months. I'm on medication for the rest of my life. And so I remember really thinking I didn't fight this hard to live to
Hmm.
not like the life I have. And so it really felt like I didn't have a choice.
Yeah. Your story is also on the CDC website because when I was Googling it, so in case anyone wanted to read the more in depth about that. So that was a very big eye opener for you pre even starting at the in your job in corporate law.
Yeah, it was right after I graduated. I deferred my start date because I was in the hospital.
Hmm.
And it was, I mean, one story that I can tell you that'll really sort of summarize what like working at a law firm was like was I started working at the law firm about 3 months after everybody else because I was in the hospital. And I
Hmm.
remember having a discussion with a partner about my hours for my first year. And my hours were lower. And I asked the partner, are they prorated? And he said, no. Um, and I said, well, I worked 9 months for everyone else's 12 months. It makes sense that my hours are lower. And he told me, yes, that's an explanation, but it's also an excuse. And we don't do excuses at this law firm. So that really just tells you sort of it was just not the environment that I wanted to be in and could see myself being
Right.
in long term.
Yeah. I think for doing a career change, it also does come down to kind of like what your core, not that a different core values is wrong, but really understanding what's important for you, and how exactly how you said, how you want to live your life. So let's talk about, you're like, I can't do this, um, related to like you having a lot of thought, I guess, as you're working the long hours. So what did you decide to do? You mentioned the trip. Tell us about
Hmm.
that.
Um,
You the finding yourself, but not finding yourself, just like taking a break.
yeah, I mean, I think the thing that is key to remembering when you make a change in your life like this is that you don't have to have it all planned. I am now so happy with the job that I have, but this job didn't exist a year and a half ago. It certainly didn't exist 7 years ago, and I didn't even know that I wanted to do something like this. So I think a lot of times it's really easy to see somebody who's made a change and think, oh, it worked out or they figured it out. But it was very, very bumpy along the way. And I didn't have a game plan. All I knew was I couldn't keep doing what I was doing. And it
Hmm.
felt far riskier to keep staying and doing the thing that I knew wouldn't make me happy than to
Hmm.
go out and do the thing that could be better, could be worse, but I think doing something that could be better is definitely less risky than doing the thing that you know is not good.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I had been at a firm, I'd been in house. I knew I wanted to do something different. I had paid off my law school loans, which was a huge barrier in terms of being able to have the freedom to make the choices I wanted to make. I gave 3 months notice, and I didn't have a game plan. I had nothing planned. I kind of figured I would take a little bit of a break and then maybe start looking for something. And I flew to South America and I didn't come back. I ended up traveling
Can you
I,
tell
I
me why you picked South America and not like Europe or some other place?
it's a really good question. Originally, I was only going to go for 3 weeks, and I had a round trip ticket for 3 weeks. I was going with a friend from the law firm I used to work with, and then another friend also from the law firm I used to work with, who coincidentally, and this was, I think, huge, he also had gone somewhere else, but called me the week I gave notice to tell me he had given notice and he was quitting and leaving. Um, so it was really nice to have a buddy. I don't know, neither of us had any sort of plan. He's now an actor and comedian in Hollywood and much, much happier and doing his own thing too. And
So cool.
um,
Oh, I love that.
yeah,
Big transition.
yeah. But we both were going on this 3-person trip to South America. We were going to go for 3 weeks, and then our friend who was still at the firm, he went back, and the two of us just didn't take our flights back, and we just stayed. And so I did
Just
come
stayed in
back
South America.
briefly. Just stay. I
Hmm.
came back briefly because once I knew this was going to be a long-term thing, I came back. I packed up my apartment, I
Hmm.
subletted it, and then I went straight back to South America. So I spent most of the time in South America, a little bit in Europe, and then a little bit in Southeast Asia. Anytime I had like a wedding to come back to, I'd switch continents. So I'd go back to the US for the wedding, I'd switch continents, go back, and keep traveling. And so it was amazing. I had no plans. I sort of viewed it as I'm going to take this time to enjoy myself and I'm having the best
Hmm.
time. And there's two ways I can handle it. I can be traveling and fully present and enjoy this experience, or I can be sort of halfway applying and never really present and really worried about what the next step was. And so I decided while I'm doing this and while I'm here, I am not going to think about the next thing. I
Hmm.
will just really, really enjoy this, live in this moment, give it 100%. And then when I come back, that's when I'll give finding the next thing 100%. But I didn't want to be straddling two worlds and unable to enjoy anything as a
Hmm.
result of not being present in any space.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm only asking this because I know your mom is Japanese,
Hmm.
and I know how my parents reacted when I left my job at Goldman Sachs. What did your I know you've talked about one-on-one, but I would love for you to share how your parents reacted. Even though you're living your own life, our parents say still
Oh,
has an impact.
well, I knew they wouldn't be thrilled, so I emailed them to tell them that this is what I was going to do. Yeah, I emailed them. I should have pulled up the email chain before because then I could read it to you. But I emailed them and I basically laid out that this was not an irresponsible choice, but was in fact calculated because I had paid off my loans and I had savings and I could afford to do this and I could always come back and find another job whenever I needed to.
Like a
My
good
dad,
lawyer.
yeah, but it was an email. It wasn't an in-person
Uh-huh.
conversation because I was too scared.
Hmm. Hmm.
My dad, who is white, he's English, said something along the lines of, we support you. We've kind of, or not we support you, but like more, I understand. Like you've said you've been very unhappy. Like I just want what's best for you and want you to be happy. My mom, I got to give her credit that she didn't explicitly say anything, but it was more of I was expecting this kind of. I guess I shouldn't be surprised. Kind of like I guess we were expecting this, but she was
Hmm.
definitely not pleased. Definitely didn't understand it. Definitely couldn't make heads or tails of why I would leave this high-paying job. And what else?
That you went to
You,
college and grad school for.
yeah. Why would you leave this? It pays so well. You are living such a great life. You're
Hmm.
not supposed to like your job. Why would you?
Yep.
What are you doing now? You are unemployed, unhoused, and just backpacking and living in hostels and staying in rooms with 6 other people. Like, what are you doing with your life?
That's kind of what I would expect. But so even getting that didn't you kind of expected that. You just continue. Did you send that before you went on your trip? Like basically.
I did,
Okay.
and when I sent it, I didn't know, and I didn't tell them because I didn't know myself that that trip would be 9 months. So nobody
Wow,
knew
I was going
as
to
we
ask
got
you
to
how long
this.
was the trip? 9 months. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it was nine
When else in your
months.
life could you do that? Take a
Um,
9 month trip, right?
no, I mean, yes and no. This isn't, to be fair, it's not the first time I've done this. I took a gap year between college and law school. I ended up living in China for a year and a half. And also sort of surprised people by the original plan was for me to come back. I did my last semester of college studying abroad in Shanghai. I loved it so much that I called up, I had already gotten into law school, so I just called the admissions office and said, will you wait for me for a year? And then I just went backpacking and worked part time and just traveled all over China and a little bit of India and, Vietnam and, just
Yeah. No,
learn
wait, when you
Chinese
said
full time.
described yourself as a compulsive globetrotter, you are a true globetrotter. The
Yeah,
fact
I
that in
can't. I
that
mean,
time.
I just got married in Spain 2 weeks ago, and then just came back from 2 weeks in Southern Africa. We have a trip to Mexico City and Egypt planned for this summer. I can't stop myself.
Oh, it's fantastic. Let's go back to, so you were backpacking. Uh, what brought you back, and what was, and then the path of where the different I guess it's almost like job experimentation.
Yeah. So I knew that I wanted to come back to New York while the weather was still warm. I knew that
Hmm.
if I came back to New York while it was cold, I would be too depressed to handle the winter. And New York in the summer is wonderful. So I came back, I think, in August or September, and was fully ready to hit the pavement and look for the next thing. I'd been gone at that point for so long, and travel for that length of time, especially when you're staying in like hostels and backpacking, really takes a toll on you. I think my physical condition was really suffering, in that, I'd lost a lot of weight. I was breaking out everywhere. I had constant postnasal drip kind of situation. And so I was ready and excited I hadn't seen my friends in so long. I was ready and excited to come back, but it was perfect time to come back because I didn't feel like I was being forced to go home. I was excited to go back and I love New York in the
Yeah.
summer. And so it was really great. But the one thing I was determined to do was to not go back to doing what I was doing before. And
Hmm.
I knew that at that point, I did not take this big risk. I didn't do all of this to end up accidentally falling back. And if it took a while to find something new, then that was okay. And I was willing to do something part time in order to sort of keep things going financially to be able to find the right thing. But as it turns out, after a couple months of searching, I found a great role at working at Catholic Charities in New York. So I spent 4 years there working in the nonprofit space. I myself am not Catholic, but they are one of the largest human services organizations, especially in New York City. They do a lot of work, everything from immigration to working with the elderly, to working with the hungry, to housing issues, to youth services, everything you can think of. So I had a couple roles there. First role was working sort of like a consultant, where I got to work with the network of 90 different nonprofits that they had in their network, and really got to see sort of the challenges that small nonprofits, large nonprofits, worked a lot with community building, corporate groups, volunteers, setting up new systems, and it was great. I really loved it. I had taken a 2/3 pay cut,
I was just going to
um,
ask about that. That's okay. That's
huge pay
pretty
cut.
big.
Yeah,
Yep.
huge
But
pay
you were okay, you
cut.
felt so okay with,
Yeah, I mean, I was basically living month to month. I
okay.
wasn't making any sort of savings, but I
Hmm.
viewed it as this is a long-term commitment toward what it is I want to be able to do.
Hmm.
Wasn't married, don't have kids. There was nobody who was financially depending on me, so that I
Yeah.
felt like it was okay for me to do something that was a little riskier and live month to month and get to do what I wanted to do. And even when I
Yeah.
had late nights, even though I wasn't making that much money, I was so much happier. I felt the work was so much more rewarding. And it was just really, really nice to be somewhere where I just felt like this isn't, I would do this work as a volunteer. Like I just
Wow.
enjoy this work.
Yeah.
And Obviously, I won't say that it was easy in terms of, especially when you're comparing yourself to your friends and all of your friends are
Oh,
advancing in their
absolutely.
careers and they're
Yep.
making so much more money and you have to say no to this. You've got to say no to trips. You've got to say no to dinners. You've got to say no to
Hmm.
shows. Whatever it is that everyone is spending money on, you have
Hmm.
to just say no. But I
Yeah.
found that I didn't feel the need to have to do that because I was so happy. And there's so many ways that you can spend your time in New York on a budget
Hmm.
that I really didn't feel like I was missing out. But
Hmm.
obviously there's always that sort of awkward balance of, and also I think a lot of people kind of did think still what I was doing was a little bit incomprehensible and not just family but friends too, I think definitely judged it, and thought couldn't understand why I was
Hmm.
doing these things that I did, but I felt very confident in my choice because
Hmm.
of how much I enjoyed the work and
Hmm.
how impactful I felt like it was.
It's interesting. I think unusually you kind of had a long game approach in that you knew you weren't going to be there forever, but it was something that was going to help you get to where you wanted to go, even though you weren't
Yeah.
sure where that would be. And then how did your time there was done before you went on to the next job?
Yeah, so I had one more role at Catholic Charities and I switched right before the pandemic.
Hmm.
So I focused on just working our youth services programming, right before the pandemic started. So it's really eye opening working with the communities that were really hard hit with COVID, being in New York City
Mm.
during that time. And throughout my time, both roles, I really found myself thinking that there had to be a more efficient way to utilize all of the financial and human capital that we have in the private sector to be able to help people. And obviously, there is a crucial role that only nonprofits and government can play in providing human services and support. But I found myself just thinking about how much additional, just how many more resources we had available in the private sector and why were we
Mm.
doing such a poor job of directing them to where they needed to be. And especially during the pandemic, I felt like it was really highlighted where you had so many people talking about how they wanted to help, how they wanted to give, how they wanted to do this or that, but it didn't feel like there was the most efficient funneling from this desire to help to
Hmm.
where I was seeing we needed the help. And so I thought, I wonder if I can make my way back to the private sector, given that I've had both these experiences, could I help be part of that journey to help better direct those resources, from the private sector to where we need assistance? So that's sort of what I was thinking was, how can I go about doing that? I ended up switching before coming to Maureen Lewis. I ended up switching to working at NYU Law School,
Hmm.
and the law school has a center for law and social entrepreneurship where we focus on like social enterprises, impact investing, essentially a center at the law school about doing good while doing business.
Hmm.
So I was executive director there for a couple years. Really got to learn a lot more about the space, got to meet a lot of lawyers in the space, got to see sort of the opportunities that we were creating for the next generation, which I think is really great. A lot of the conversations, a lot of the opportunities, these are not things that I had access to when I was in law school, when I was trying to figure
Mm.
out what sort of avenues are there. Um,
Yeah,
I didn't have any of those conversations available to me. I had no idea what I was doing. I
did that not
quit and
exist before?
it might have in some small capacity if you knew where to look.
Ah,
But
okay.
those conversations were not readily available. At NYU, you have
Hmm.
student groups, you have clinics that focus on this, you have classes that focus on this.
Oh, that's
And I
interesting.
think
Yeah.
NYU is probably a leader in the space, and I don't think most other law schools offer anything like that. More and more so over time. Business schools offer, I think, a lot more of that, and law schools are maybe a little bit behind in those conversations. But it's really great and encouraging to think that you could go to law school and you could know that these jobs exist, and you could then figure
Amaris,
out
how
and
did
position
you
yourself.
switch when you were at Catholic Charities, and then you knew when you started questioning, like there must be a more efficient way between private and and the nonprofit. How did you find, or what made you go to NYU? Like, were you looking, and then what attracted you about that position?
Yeah, I was looking, I was applying to a wide range of jobs. I was actually considering a job at NYU and then also considering working at a law firm that focused on just tax exempt organizations, so like just nonprofits, as a lawyer. And so the fact that I was even thinking maybe I should go back to being a lawyer, that was one of the things. And moving back to California, I was thinking maybe I'll move back to California. Maybe I'll go to this small boutique law firm, focus on just tax exempt organizations. Maybe I would enjoy being a lawyer more if it was just the types of clients that I'm interested in.
Hmm.
Um, and then I was also thinking about NYU. Ultimately, I decided NYU in part because I like the business side more, rather than the actual practice of law. And so that's my
Hmm.
current role too, is more of like a business side role rather than a
Hmm.
practicing attorney. Um, and it was something that I didn't know that much about yet at the time. And so NYU seemed like a really good opportunity to just learn about that space and
Hmm.
figure out, they're sort of one of the leaders in the space, especially in law schools. And so I just thought it would be good next step. And again, I didn't think it would be the forever step going there
Hmm.
because I knew I didn't want to be in academia forever.
Hmm.
Um, but I think a lot of times when you're trying to forge your own career journey, it's good to just think of things as nothing has to be forever. You can try this for some time, and if you like it, it could be forever.
Yeah.
But it certainly doesn't have to be. Nothing is set in stone. And I
Hmm.
think a lot of finding the right place is just being open to pivoting and figuring out like, okay, let me try a little this way, adjust a little this way.
Hmm.
I like this in this role. I don't like this. I need this in the next role. And then you inch your way forward until you
It's
can find the
it's
right
career
place.
dating. It sounds like
Yeah.
career dating.
Yeah. And I was doing a lot of dating in the time too. So it was definitely akin to that.
I'm also thinking how we're lucky that in the US, it's a lot easier to do these kind of changes than in a lot of other countries, right? Where it's like I wouldn't say necessarily normal, but people will give you a chance, even if it's not, you weren't doing exactly the same thing before. Um,
Totally.
so, oh, that's right. We're going to go back to how did you find where you are now from NYU?
So I actually got to know a lot of the lawyers I work with now when I was at NYU because some of the lawyers, I worked with them on writing a case study. I worked with them on putting together our annual conference. And so I knew who these lawyers were. I knew that they were really passionate about the impact work. And when
Hmm.
I saw that they were creating this new posting, I got really excited, because I thought this is exactly what I've been looking for, but has never existed before. And
Uh-huh.
I knew it wasn't just sort of like for marketing or PR purposes. I knew it was something the firm was actually committed to because I
Hmm.
had at that point known some of these lawyers for a year and a half and had actually worked with them and knew that this is something that was important to them. And that has proven to be true since I've
Hmm.
started, is that there is a lot of commitment there. There is a lot of excitement in the space, and there's a lot of value placed on being able to work with these clients and help reduce like barriers to entry so
Hmm.
that they can figure out how to access resources to do good in the impact space.
And I know, in case anyone's listening, but do you feel like this is where your forever career might be, or you're still kind of feeling it out?
I think it could be. I mean, I
Hmm.
definitely, unlike previous roles, really view this from a long-term perspective.
Hmm.
I think this role is changing a lot. I think the
Hmm.
first year will be very different from the second year, will be very different from the third year. We have sort of ideas and goals of what it'll eventually look like, but I think it's going to keep changing. The space is really changing. No other law firm has a role like this. I think eventually others probably will.
Yeah.
And so I feel like we're really at a critical time where there's just so much opportunity to make this role into whatever it needs to be and whatever it has to end up being, depending on like what our clients need and how the space changes, and impact is changing so much. And so, yeah, I think I could be here. I don't, saying anything is forever. It's like
Yes, no,
a little
I
bit,
agree. Like,
yeah,
even the
but
path that you took, you never would have predicted.
yeah, but this one does feel like it can be, the long
It could
term
be
one that
there.
sticks. Yeah.
Whenever I think about career changes, because I also don't want to take for granted, sometimes coming from certain background makes things easier. Like, I think when I made my change, even though I never asked my parents for help, I know that deep down inside, if I was like, can I move back home? Or I need some financial help, that they would be there. And so I can't say that that doesn't affect anything. For you, do you feel, or maybe share like aspects of your backgrounds or life that that maybe made it easier for you to be able to explore?
100% what you said. I mean, I recognize that I come from a place of privilege where any choice I was making was not really that risky, and that I never was potentially in a position where I might not have a place to live. I might not be able to eat because I didn't have a job. I
Hmm.
think it is, I mean, I think it's important to acknowledge that that privilege exists, and that, yes, it was a risk, in that I could have been unemployed for a lot longer. I could have ended up having a job I didn't want, but those are really not that risky things to deal with in the big picture.
Hmm.
And so I never ever felt like I had to put it all on the line. It felt
Hmm.
like, it did feel like a really, it didn't feel like, I told my parents in the email, ultimately it doesn't feel like it's that risky. It felt like it was like a calculated, reasonable risk. I didn't think I was doing anything that was unhinged.
Hmm.
I think it was, but 100%, I think to say that that advantage didn't make it easier for me to be able to make these changes. I mean, if I ran out of money, I could have called my parents at any time and said, I need to live at home. They would have not charged me anything. They would have paid for my food. And they wouldn't have been thrilled, but I would have been fine. Um,
Yeah.
so 100%. Yeah.
It's hard because I think about career change, like, oh, I feel like I was lucky in some ways. Sometimes people say that's so courageous. I'm like, it is, or it's a change because you just feel like I can't be here any longer. But I remind them like, okay, would I think that if I had a different kind of family
Hmm.
background? Um, so the final question I have for you, even though I feel like you've been dropping advice throughout your story, is anything you'd want, advice you want someone to think about if they're thinking about making a big career change, uh, since you've gone through the whole process. So, key tips or advice, one or two,
Good.
like,
Yeah. Good question. I mean, I think it's important if you're able to, and the only thing that's holding you back is just like fear of society, or internal fear, or pressure, or panic. It only gets harder the longer you stay somewhere you're not happy.
yep.
And so the sooner you move, provided you're able to, like, again, like what we talked about, you have to, I don't recommend people doing things that aren't at all thought out. But if you're able to do it with your family, if people have kids and they have people to support, then obviously you have to calculate things a little bit differently. But if you are able to, and it is a risk that you are able to do, I wouldn't let internal fear or society pressure be the thing that stops you.
Hmm.
Because if you're unhappy, that unhappiness will only compound. And more often than not, being in a place where you're not happy, being in a career where you're not happy, adding an extra 6 months, adding an extra year to your resume is not going to help put you in a better place to make that switch. More often than not, you're just going to continue to get pigeonholed.
Mm,
And
that's a good point. Hmm.
yeah, I think the longer you wait, the tougher it can be. But again, even if you waited a really long time, I think it's never too late. And if I, in 10 years, decided I needed to do something completely different, then I would still want to try and do something completely different too, because life is too short to spend so many hours of your day being unhappy. Um,
Yeah.
Even this week, people have asked me, like, oh, how hard has it been to be back in the office? And obviously, traveling is more fun than any job. But at the end of the day, I don't dread coming into work or anything like that. I enjoy the work I do. And I think that is so valuable and so important. And I think the far riskier thing to do in life is to stay put and do nothing when you're
Hmm.
unhappy in a situation, whether it's a job or a relationship or personal health or whatever it is. The status quo, if you're miserable, is only going to eat away at you and just make things harder and harder.
Amaris, thank you so much. That was so great to hear your story about where you got to where you are now. I'll put information. Can people reach out to you if they have questions? Is it
Of
okay if I'll
course.
put probably
Yeah,
like
no,
your
of course.
Instagram in the show notes?
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Thank you all for listening, and I'll talk to you next week.
I'm Coach Tina. For more information about how to work with me, head to ironstrongfitness.com and send me a message. I'll see you next time.